edition of What's AD, where we discuss and analyze current events. My partner, Manny Zúñiga, is on assignment. Today, we'll be having a discussion with Teresa Frontado, Senior Editor of El Nuevo Herald. Hello, Ms. Frontado. How are you?
Hi, Javier. Thank you for the invitation.
No problem. To start off the discussion, I wanted to ask you, is the situation in Venezuela worthy of international news coverage?
It's definitely worthy of international news coverage, especially because of the extent of the protest and the geopolitical location of Venezuela and its role as a provider of oil for the U.S. and around the world. It's also important because of how closely linked at this point the situation in Venezuela is with the situation in Cuba, and that's something that our community here in Miami really deeply cares about. So it's definitely something worth monitoring and following.
Okay, and how has the media influenced what is happening in Venezuela?
Well, unfortunately, the media within Venezuela is going through a very rough period. Independent media. The government is using the exchange control to limit the amount of money that, for example, newspaper companies can get in order to buy paper. So the big national newspapers are down. I mean, they went from 40 pages and they're down to 6. And if they don't get the money soon, they might have to stop circulating. The government has also been encroaching. The government through different means have been encroaching into the television media and into radio in a way that doesn't allow for freedom of expression. Yesterday, the head of the investigation unit of Últimas Noticias, which is one of the biggest newspapers in Venezuela, quit because somebody in her team had done a big investigation on how the opposition were protesting using this model called guarimbas, and the newspaper, who had been recently bought by somebody with close links to the government, refused to publish it. So she quit in protest, and the whole newsroom was staging a protest yesterday. So the media in Venezuela are under siege. What they have been trying to do is to get international attention to what is going on in the country, in the hopes that through international attention there might be some kind of pressure into to the government of Nicolás Maduro, so there can be some political oxygen, and there's some spaces to open and dialogue.
As a professional, do you think what you just described is fair or just to the news, to the media in Venezuela?
No, journalists around the world were deeply worried about what is going on in Venezuela and what is happening to our colleagues. And it's not only Venezuelan journalists, foreign journalists that have been covering the protests that have also been subject to violence, have been subject to detention, unjustified detention. This is something that the Inter-American Press Association has already took a statement, and you know, people around the world, we worried about our colleagues. I mean, not far, a couple of months ago, one of our colleagues in the Miami Herald was detained in Venezuela, and that was a pretty stressful situation for us as a media organization. So there's always this concern, and again, as part of not only a professional concern for our colleagues, but also, you know, a personal concern as people, as a profession that is committed to the freedom of expression and the free flow of information.
And can you relate this to maybe what's happening in the Ukraine, especially in Crimea, with the reporters being harassed, as has been coming in the news?
This seems to be an unfortunate new trend. Well, no, I don't want to say new because it's been going on for a couple of years, but there seems to be a new trend where before, journalists that were covering these kind of movements, where the fact that they usually wear vests that say press, and they're marked as members of the press, they were usually respected, but that has not been the case. And it's not only in Korea, it happened also in Egypt, where one female journalist, American female journalist, was sexually assaulted. That has happened around the world. I think it's personally, I think it shows a deterioration of the public discourse, and how our societies are becoming so polarized, where you cannot tolerate any or certain acts are perceived as acts of normal dissent, or acts, in the case of the press, I mean, our role as third-party observers are sometimes perceived as an aggression or a disagreement. But it's certainly unfortunate that these kind of incidents are occurring around the world.
No, yeah, definitely, especially in the 21st century, where democracy should be at its highest.
Yeah.
Do you think the opposition is making any headway in changing the government in Venezuela?
Well, according to what they're saying, I mean, officially they're not protesting. I mean, the official intention of the protest is not to kick Nicolás Maduro out of the office. Students are in the street claiming or protesting against insecurity. Remember that all of this started because one student was attacked in Táchira, in one of the Andean states, and that's why the whole student community around the country was mobilized, because the students in Táchira went out to protest that one of their own was attacked right outside their university, and there was a violent repression against them, and that generated a whole series of reaction. And there's also a lot of a sense in the civil society that they're protesting against insecurity, the rise of violence, robberies, kidnapping, assaults, and also the problem with food distribution. There's scarcity. People are having a hard time finding basic goods like milk or eggs or bread. So those are, at least in theory, the main motivation behind the protests. They have not, the protesters have not said out front, we want you out. They're saying there has to be the government has to address this situation. And then the response of the government has, I mean, the government is taking it as this is aimed as this is an effort to destabilize the government.
Yeah, like a coup d'etat or something.
Yeah, that has been their main explanation. But if you talk to the leaders of the opposition, which we have done, I mean, what they tell you is, listen, we just don't want to be killed in the streets. We just want to go out and find food, and we want the government held accountable, as it should be in any democratic country, to uphold our basic human rights.
Yes, and bouncing off this question, do you foresee the violence in Venezuela increasing or decreasing?
Unfortunately, this seems to be a situation that seems to be prolonging in time. Both sides are proclaiming that they're not going to give in to the other side's demands. We will have to see how long can Venezuelan civil society hold on to the use of force by official means and unofficial means. And by this I mean these kind of paramilitary groups that are roaming around the streets of towns terrorizing opposition protesters, and how long the government can hold on with their main cities barricades, and where there's no free flow there's no free movement of people because of it. That's part of the protest. But unfortunately, both sides seems to be very entrenched on their positions at this moment.
And what do you think is the primary role of the Venezuelan exile community to the current situation? What should they be doing, mobilizing, etc.?
Well, so far, what we have been seeing, it's a lot of, as you say, movement and expressions of support of what their families and friends are going through in Venezuela. There has been here in Miami and in some other cities efforts to collect medicine, collect supplies for the students that are in jail, or for the people that have been wounded. I mean, because of the distribution problem that they're having in Venezuela, it's very hard to find even basic medicine. So if you have a cut, or if somebody shot at you, which has happened against students, it's hard to find what you need. So there's been a lot of efforts in that sense, and basically the Venezuelan community seems here in Miami seems very committed to keep this issue in the forefront. They see it as a way to preserve, in a way, the safety of the protester. They say as long as the world is paying attention, we hope that Maduro is, we, and when I say we, is the opposite, is the exile community in Venezuela, think that that's going to prevent Maduro from really attacking or proceeding with a massacre, or doing something really horrible to the protesters. So that's where we have seen their commitment is in.
All right, and Ms. Frontalo, do you feel comfortable asking some questions from the answering some questions from the audience?
Sure.
Does anyone have some questions? Any questions?
Do you think the economy in Venezuela will begin to grow better, or will it just become deteriorating?
Well, it depends on what is the end result of this situation. In any case, I think in the short run it's going to be bad, because the extent of the damage that has been done to the basic units of production is really deep. So even if there's a change in circumstances, in political circumstances, it's still going to take a while to get the whole economic system working again. There's a lot of companies that have had to close because of the limitations that have been imposed on them. And the government would also have to work on attracting foreign investment, inviting people to move in, and they haven't done any investment in oil, in the infrastructure needed for oil, and that's Venezuela's #1 product. So whoever is in charge really needs to think hard about these things, and it's gonna get worse, unfortunately, because before it can get better. Yes.
The people of Venezuela will give up.
I see very determined students right now. And as I explained, I see it's kind of heartbreaking because you see these young people that are almost your age that are really putting their lives in jeopardy for something that they really believe in. They feel under threat, they feel under attack, and they have promised they're not going to move until things change. I also see the other side very entrenched in what they think. They think they're right, and they don't see a need to talk or find any kind of compromise with what the students are asking for. So it's hard to predict what is going to be. I'm just, as a journalist, I can only describe what I see, and I see a very polarized society with people really hold on to their positions and not a lot of dialogue going on. Yes.
How long do you think the situation will last?
Well, that is a good question. I mean, there's some kind of precedent to what is going on right now, and that is the oil strike from 2002 to 2003. During those years, the middle class, there were the government forced some changes in the oil industry, and that combined with some other economic situations that were going on and some political factors going on, generated a protest that then created a whole strike of the whole oil industry, and then it expanded to other areas of the economy. And that lasted, I think, for 3-4 months, where the whole middle class stopped showing up to work. But we're not going to work until this change. And finally, the government was able to break them down. They was able to break them down because the government controls the oil, and the oil is the #1 industry in Venezuela, which is sad, but it's the truth. I mean, in that sense, they have a lot of control over what happens. So I cannot predict how long this is going to last. I know that the situation in some areas is dire. There's a lot of concern about food distribution, that the people are simply not going to get food. And I don't know how long the protesters can hold under those circumstances.
Do you think the U.S. will get involved?
I think the Obama administration has already taken some position, calling for, cool down and criticizing the violence, especially against the student and civil society. Usually in these cases, there's some kind of backdoor diplomacy. From what I've heard, it's more the church who is in a better position to mediate between the parties. I'm not sure that Washington can, at this point, facilitate any kind of peaceful resolution because of Nicolás Maduro's strong anti-American position, fueled in part by their alliance with Fidel Castro. They just, they like to play and they like to manipulate people, saying we have this big enemy, which in this case is the United States. So I'm thinking that if there is a negotiated solution, it's going to come through some other parties, maybe the church, maybe some European country, but unfortunately, I don't foresee that Washington can play that role. They did already also take a stand by saying that if the violence continues, they're going to take some measures, specifically targeting members of the government, freezing their assets and not allowing them to come. And that usually tends to put a fear on some public officials, and we hope that it helps in keeping them cool and making them think twice before ordering anybody shoot against any more people.
And Teresa, as a professional, do you think they should take any economic sanctions to Venezuela? Should they include economic penalties for what they're doing?
As a journalist, I'm not I can only talk about what we can report and what other sources are telling us. It's my understanding that this is an issue that is in the forefront, especially of the Florida delegation in our Congress in Washington. It's a concern of everybody from Marco Rubio to Ileana Roslan to the rest of our delegation, and I understand that there's been a lot of conversations as to what is an effective way to deal with this situation. That's all I can say about it.
And Ms. Frontalo, due to time restrictions, I'll like one more question.
Yes.
What do you believe is the possible outcome of all these protests? What's the possible outcome?
What do you mean? What is possible, or what each party decide? What each party wants, it's for the other party to go away, which I don't think is realistic. I think that there has to be some kind of dialogue, and between the two parties. The government of Nicolás Maduro needs to open up and listen to what the civil society is saying, and he needs to open up and hear what the middle class and the entrepreneurs are telling him, and put in place a different set of rules if he wants to perpetuate himself in power. The opposition also, unfortunately, is going to have to work a little bit, because at this point what they want is for him to leave right now, and I'm not sure, or from the information that we're getting, he seems to be pretty entrenched in his power.
Yeah, I guess both sides have to take action. And one quick last question.
Yes, as a teacher of middle and high school, I think it's very important for students to know what they can do, especially for those students who are the sons of Venezuelan immigrants. What can they do? How can they help?
Well, as I said, the Venezuelan community here in Miami has been very active in terms of gathering medical supplies. That's a big need. Another thing that the community has been very active on is to keeping the issue in the forefront. Again, history has shown that usually when there's international tensions, there is less of a chance of the government of being violent, or the government would think twice before shooting against a group of students demonstrating. So that is one thing, keep the issue on the forefront. Praying, that I can never, I don't think anybody can never underline enough the power of praying.
How can they keep the issue in the forefront?
Well, it's been very interesting to see how the people protesting have been using social media. News organizations and governments around the world are really paying attention to what's going on in social media. So there's been all these initiatives using different hashtags, SOS Venezuela, using Twitter. They did it during the Oscars, and there was this actor who was actually the first or the second one that got an Oscar that actually spoke about the Venezuelan situation. So that is a fast, cheap, effective way to keep the issue in the forefront. And one other thing is that I would recommend to the students is to be very mindful of the information that they rely. Because one problem as a news organization that we're having is that there's a lot of people repeating things without checking to see if things are true or not. And that tends to work against your cause, because then people tend to take you less seriously. So try not to retweet or not to relay messages or images unless you know that is a real image. That is a real image of a student in Caracas, or it's a real image of a protest anywhere else.
So Teresa, we have talked about the exile community, the Venezuelan exile community. We have talked about the violence in Venezuela, among other things. And finally, I wanted to ask you, how does it feel to be a Belen mom and knowing that your child is involved in a community that is taking action to help democracy and help establish justice around the world?
Well, it makes me very proud. My son was one of the students who participated in the SOS, and he did it on his own, and that is very touching for me. I'm proud because I feel that he's perpetuating the values that I'm trying to teach him, which is against democracy, freedom of speech, and respect of the other. It doesn't matter if the other thinks different. I think 99% of the problem of what is going on right now in Venezuela is that people have lost respect of the fact that there's differences. Everybody's different, and we should all live in a society that is inclusive enough to include to accommodate for that. So I'm proud of that, and I'm happy that he gets to have that in Belen.
Well, thank you very much, Ms. Frontalo. Thank you, everybody, and thank you all for watching.